Welcome to our final week of Waitlisted, where we've been talking about waiting and waiting and waiting. Can you guess what I'm waiting for? I'm counting down to Christmas morning. Only 243 days left. Okay, if you're watching this after the day I loaded it up, it's going to be less than that. And okay, maybe it's weird to start counting down to Christmas this early. To be honest, I'm not, but my best friend is. So tell me, when do you start counting down to Christmas? When do you start listening to Christmas music? Do you make any Christmas countdowns? And when does your family start decorating? The Christmas decorating process is a big part of anticipating and waiting for Christmas to arrive. From choosing a tree, to decorating the tree, to hanging the Christmas lights, to baking Christmas cookies, decorating for Christmas is supposed to be a fun family memory. But let's be honest, sometimes it's torture. How much do you enjoy decorating for Christmas with your family? Do you love it? Think it's boring or exhausting? Does it usually turn into a huge family fight? When you're excitedly waiting for Christmas morning to arrive, the waiting can be painful. But do you know what's even more painful? Waiting while you're fighting with the people you live with. Our conversation today isn't really about Christmas, but here's what it is about. Family, fights, waiting, getting sick of waiting, and wanting to give up. For the last few weeks, we've been talking a lot about waiting, and not just about waiting for Christmas Day. We've talked about waiting during really difficult periods. We said that God has a plan, but you might have to wait for it. That while you're waiting, God is faithful. And that while you're waiting, God is listening. But let's be honest. Sometimes when we've been waiting and waiting and waiting, we just get tired. Sometimes it feels like everyone is against us. Like we're trying so hard to hold some really heavy things and no one is offering to help. Sometimes we want to give up. There are so many reasons why we might want to give up hope. Maybe you've been trying so hard, but nothing seems to change. Maybe you've tried to make wise choices, but the people around you don't seem to support you. Or maybe your family is a mess and doesn't seem to be getting any better. Especially when we feel alone, unsupported, or even abandoned by others, it's not always easy to believe that we can keep going when we've already spent so much time waiting. There's someone in Scripture who understands this. His name is Joseph, and he's a pretty important figure in the Old Testament of the Bible. Joseph's story begins when he's 17 years old. These are the family records of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended sheep with his brothers. The young man was working with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons because Joseph was a son born to him in his old age, and he made a long-sleeved robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. Then Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. There we were, binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly my sheaf stood up, and your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." "Are you really going to reign over us?" his brothers asked him. "Are you really going to rule us?" So they hated him even more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream and told it to his brothers. "Look," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun, moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." He told his father and brothers, and his father rebuked him. "What kind of dream is this that you have had?" he said. "Am I and your mother and your brothers really going to come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Joseph was his dad's favorite son, and it was pretty obvious. Jacob loved Joseph so much that he gave him a special coat and special treatment. And you can imagine how awkward that made things between Joseph and his brothers. To make things even more awkward, God began speaking to Joseph in his dreams, letting Joseph know he would one day rule the nation and rule over his brothers. Instead of keeping this information to himself, Joseph shared it with his brothers, which made things awkward. Instead of taking the hint that his brothers didn't appreciate being told Joseph would one day be their boss, Joseph continued telling his brothers about these visions from God. And of course, things got even more tense. His brothers had gone to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem. Israel said to Joseph, "Your brothers, you know, are pasturing the flocks at Shechem. Get ready. I'm sending you to them." "I'm ready," Joseph replied. Then Israel said to him, "Go and see how your brothers and the flocks are doing, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the Hebron Valley, and he went to Shechem. A man found him there, wandering in the field, and asked him, "What are you looking for?" "I'm looking for my brothers," Joseph said. "Can you tell me where they are pasturing their flocks?" "They've moved on from here," the man said. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph set out after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him in the distance, and before he had reached them, they plotted to kill him. They said to one another, "Oh look, here comes that dream expert. So now come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We can say that a vicious animal ate him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to save him from them. He said, "Let's not take his life." Reuben also said to them, "Don't shed blood. Throw him into this pit in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him," intending to rescue him from them and return him to his father. When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped off Joseph's robe, the robe of many colors that he had on. Then they took him and threw him into the pit. The pit was empty without water. They sat down to eat a meal, and when they looked up, there was a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were carrying aromatic gum, balsam, and resin, going down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come on, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When Midianite traders passed by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took Joseph to Egypt. When Joseph's brothers finally had enough of hearing Joseph talk about his awesomeness, they decided to get rid of him. At first, they planned to kill him, but one of the brothers convinced the others to spare his life and sell him into slavery instead. I guess that's an improvement on murder, but let's not imagine this brother is a hero or anything. Can you imagine what Joseph must have been experiencing when he realized how much his own family hated him? While he waited in the well, when he realized he'd been thrown into a foreign country where he knew no one, while he traveled with that caravan, waiting to find out where he'd end up and how he'd be treated when he arrived. That's enough uncertainty and loneliness to make most people give up hope. But that's not even the end of Joseph's misfortunes. When he arrived in Egypt, God gave Joseph a ton of incredible opportunities. Things probably seemed to be looking up for Joseph. But then... Now Joseph had been taken to Egypt. An Egyptian named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guards, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, serving in the household of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made everything he did successful, Joseph found favor with his master and became his personal attendant. Potiphar also put him in charge of his household and placed all that he owned under his authority. From the time that he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. The Lord's blessing was on all that he owned, in his house and in his fields. He left all that he owned under Joseph's authority. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. After some time, his master's wife looked longingly at Joseph and said, "Sleep with me." But he refused. "Look," he said to his master's wife, "with me here my master does not concern himself with anything in his house, and he has put all that he owns under my authority. No one in this house is greater than I am. He has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. So how could I do this immense evil, and how could I sin against God?" Although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her. Now one day he went into the house to do his work, and none of the household servants were there. She grabbed him by his garment and said, "Sleep with me." But leaving his garment in her hand, he escaped and ran outside. When she saw that he had left his garment with her and had run outside, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "my husband brought a Hebrew man to make fools of us. He came to me so he could sleep with me, and I screamed as loud as I could. When he heard me screaming for help, he left his garment beside me and ran outside." She put Joseph's garment beside her until his master came home. Then she told him the same story. "The Hebrew slave you brought to us came to make a fool of me, but when I screamed for help, he left his garment beside me and ran outside." When his master heard the story his wife told him, "These are the things your slave did to me," he was furious and had him thrown into prison, where the king's prisoners were confined. Just when things were beginning to look up for Joseph, he faced a new set of difficulties. Can you imagine what Joseph must have been experiencing when he was being preyed upon by powerful people, when he had no one to turn to, when he was abandoned by the people he thought were his allies, when he realized he was going to be thrown into jail unjustly? Once again, that's enough to make most people give up hope. If you were Joseph, what would you do? Give up? Punch someone? Trust God? No idea? This isn't even the end of Joseph's misfortunes, but let's see what he does next. So Joseph was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. He granted him favor with the prison warden. The warden put all the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority, and he was responsible for everything that was done there. The warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything that he did successful. Joseph continued to live in that prison for years, forgotten by the Pharaoh and his own family. Joseph even had a chance to be freed, but his opportunity was lost when, once again, Joseph was forgotten. I won't tell you how the story ends for two reasons. One, because you can read it for yourself in the book of Genesis, and two, because it's not the point of our conversation today. Today, we're talking about what to do when you're sitting in the dark, waiting for help, looking for hope, uncertain about your future. When Joseph was in this position, he had every reason to give up and lose hope, but he didn't. Even though everything seemed to be going wrong, and Joseph wasn't sure if he'd ever make it out of prison, or if God would ever fulfill that promise of making Joseph the ruler of a nation, he knew that God was still with him. While he was waiting, God had a plan. God was faithful. God was listening. In all that time, God never gave up on Joseph, so Joseph never gave up on God. And if you're waiting on God right now, don't give up, because God's not giving up on you either. You might be thinking, this sounds good, but how? How do I not give up? How do I find hope when things feel hopeless? How do I hang on when I feel like I'm all alone? Here are 5 ideas. Talk to God and don't stop. Don't ever stop talking to God. Like we talked about last week, tell God how you feel and what you're experiencing. Then ask for help to hold on. Talk to other people. Joseph may have been abandoned and alone, but you are not, even if you feel that way sometimes. On top of your friends and family, our church is filled with people who you can talk with. If you're overwhelmed or feeling hopeless, let's talk about it. We're here to walk through it with you. Remember, God is stronger than you think. When Joseph was in that well, he never could have guessed the opportunities God would give him in Egypt. When he was in prison, he had no idea what God had in store for his future. When he was betrayed by his brothers, he couldn't have anticipated the way God would one day restore their relationship. God did all of those things and more, and that's the same God who's telling you right now not to give up. God is stronger than you think. And remember, you're stronger than you think. You're made in the image of God. You're wonderfully created by a creator who designed you on purpose. You are strong, capable, and resilient. And when your strength fails, and sometimes it will, remember that in your weakness, God is strong on your behalf. And finally, choose hope. Hope isn't just something that happens to us. In many ways, it's something we can choose. We can choose. We choose hope when we fill our minds with what's good and true. We choose hope when we choose to talk about our struggles rather than trying to handle them alone. We choose hope when we tell God how much we need help. And we choose hope when we decide not to give up, no matter what. So what are you waiting for? And how are you not going to give up? Will you talk to God? Talk to someone you trust? Remind yourself of God's strength? Remind yourself of your own strength? Choose hope? No matter how different our situations are right now, we can all do something to choose hope, trust, and perseverance. Spend some time this week reflecting, praying, and deciding what your next steps should be. As we close out this series, I hope you find hope in the stories we've shared about the men and women who waited on God. Abraham and Sarah remind us that God has a plan, but we might have to wait for it. Paul and Silas remind us that while we're waiting, God is faithful. David reminds us that while we're waiting, God is listening. And Joseph reminds us that while we're waiting, we can't give up because God's not going to give up on us. So no matter what you're waiting for right now, keep going because God's not finished with you yet.